Hello. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Steve. Steve Gonzo says Colorado State Representative Richard Holtorf has apologized after referring to another lawmaker as buckwheat, quote unquote. And Dolores has signed in both on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you. Carmen says, it's a present to be present. Hi, everyone. Kay says, hi, all. Glad to see you. Glad to see you, Kay. Lana says, howdy. Howdy indeed, Lana. It's good to see you. Okay, where's Bonnie? Don't see Bonnie yet. Okay, so this is about, of course, Biden's first 100 days. Where we stand after the 100 days, where he stands after the 100 days, where the country stands, where we're going, all kinds of stuff like that. So, let's go to a first 100 column called Bidenism's 1-2 punch. It's from the American Prospect and was written by Harold Meyerson, was it? Or was it Kuttner? Yes, Harold Meyerson on April 29th. Bidenism's 1-2 punch. And so Meyerson says perhaps Biden was compelled to wait longer, perhaps because he was compelled to wait longer than any presidential aspirant in American history before actually winning the White House. Joe Biden understands timing. Well, I'm not sure about that, but let's see what he has to say. Not just the need to move quickly on his far-reaching agenda, but also the order in which he presents its components. If Biden has made one thing clear in his first 100 days as president, it's that he understands and is a master of sequencing. Well, I'm not sure I really agree with that completely. It sure took him long enough to get the American Rescue Plan through. He didn't seem to be exactly whipping the Congress to get it out. Kind of took a long time for the House and the Senate, to coordinate, to go through the reconciliation steps, and to finally get it passed. Instead of something passing in the first week, it passed around March 15th, as I recall. Anyway, in his first address to Congress, as in his first 100 days, he led with proposals for fundamental change, but particularly with proposals so popular that they're hard to oppose. In the Republican response to Biden's speech to the nation, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott skipped lightly and quickly through his critique of Biden's proposals for infrastructure, family assistance, and access to health care. And he was in such a rush because Republicans know that Biden's case is compelling. Boy, I hope Meyerson's right about that. But we will see some evidence shortly. Like his fellow GOP peers, Scott spent much more time on racial, religious, and cultural wedge issues while proclaiming that America is not a racist nation, but rather one with Christianity in opposition to abortion at its core. This came after Biden had just presented the closest thing to a social democratic manifesto that any American president has ever delivered. Gee. was Harold Morrison and I watching the same speech? But it's precisely the social democratic aspects of Biden's agenda that win the greatest popular support, including a quarter to a third of rank and file Republicans. As we'll see shortly, Harold Morrison's right about that. So long as the debate focuses on the lived experience of the American people, Republicans don't have much to say. Scott offered faint praise for hardworking single mothers, but Biden concretely offered them affordable child care and an extension of the wildly popular child allowance included in the American Rescue Act. As to any specific argument against universal pre-K, community college, bigger exchange, subsidies in the Affordable Care Act, paid sick and family leave, the elimination of lead in water pipes, but the elimination of lead water pipes, but also America First purchasing policies, tax increases on billionaires and offshoring corporations, and sundry other Biden proposals, the Republicans in general, and Scott in particular, have been largely mute because they want the American people to forget as soon as possible that Biden made these proposals. Biden has put a lot on the table, while Republicans prefer to argue about what he hasn't put on the table. For example, his non-existent war on hamburgers. Having established with his rollout of the COVID vaccination program that the federal government can actually get important things done, Biden is now leading with fights he knows he can clearly win in the court of public opinion. That's still no guarantee he and his Democratic cohorts can get through to the Senate, but Republicans already sense they'll pay a price for blocking them. And I think Harold Morrison is right about that if the Republicans obstruct too much and are loud about it too much and talk too much against the infrastructure bill, that gives the Democrats and Biden something to run on. And given how popular the proposals are, if they run on it correctly, then the Republicans are likely to pay a price in 2022 for obstruction, especially since they've been so open about the idea of obstructing and ensuring the failure of the administration so that they can win in 2022. They've been a little too open about that, even more open in some ways than they were when Obama was president in 2009. Biden has also made clear his support for other important fights: voting rights, police reform, gun controls, a rational immigration policy. But for now, his emphasis is on the creation of a more broadly shared prosperity. In his speech, he cited the research of the left-wing economic policy institute, EPI, on the 320 to 1 ratio of CEO pay to median worker pay. That is huge. I do find it strange, though, that Morrison characterizes the EPI as a left-wing outlet, when I'm sure that quite a few people in America, especially on the Republican side, would frame him and the American prospect as a left-wing outlet as well. Biden also borrowed a phrase, what works is in trickle-down economics, but middle-out economics, from one of America's precious few left-wing billionaires, Nick Hanauer. But he quoted Hanauer and the EPI because he knows the American public is ready for a de-plutocratization of their economy. I hope so, at long last. Morrison says that all reflects a sense of sequencing. He made clear in his speech that he'll push legislation to reduce the price of prescription drugs by having the government negotiate down the prices. But he hasn't actually introduced the legislation yet and left drug pricing reform out of the American Family's plan. He knows he'll face a deluge of big pharma attacks when he does, and he wants the government's credibility enhanced by its performance, not just on the pandemic, but also on its job creation and family assistance when he takes on the drug industry. So the suggestion is he wants to build up his credibility and the government's credibility and the administration's credibility after people see that he's done great on the pandemic, on job creation, and on family assistance. Those first healthcare improvements come later, not quite yet. I suppose I ought to remind you here, it seems to be what's going on with the Congressional Progressive Caucus as well. They're not pushing hard on Medicare for All right now. They're waiting for hearings. They're looking to build public support through the hearings. They won't be getting serious about doing something about health care until after the work on infrastructure and American family assistance is done. Going on with the article. Besides, if Biden get a fight going next year that pits Democrats on the side of consumers against Republicans who are defending the drug companies, that wouldn't be a bad thing for voters to think about as the midterm elections approach. Throughout his speech, both in the written text and his own interpolations, Biden repeatedly stressed that the nation is in competition with others, mostly China, on the question of which will thrive and which will sink in the 21st century economy, failing to use the government's power to reshore the research and industry, to recreate a vibrant and more inclusive middle class, he argues, is a prescription for national decline. His argument with potentially wide political appeal. Okay, I should say, it is an argument with potentially wide political appeal. In one sense, it's an appeal to a sane American form of nationalism, unlike any previous president since the current era of financial globalization began. He states that the past 40 years of government acquiescence in and even encouragement of corporate flight and offshore investment has proven to be a national disaster. And he puts forth policies that would reverse that dynamic. Of course, we have to recognize this is a betrayal. If he is indeed doing this, it's a betrayal of his whole earlier career when he was instrumental in pushing that globalization forward. and encouraging corporate flight and offshore investment. Morrison goes on and says, in another sense, it's an appeal to the nation's commitment to democracy, recognizing that the rising challenge to the nation isn't simply coming from other countries, but from autocracy itself, from the claims that autocracy provides a better path to progress than democracy does. If there is such a thing as Bidenism, it is this: a one-two punch aimed at the financial globalism and oppressive autocracy, an affirmation of the value of both an egalitarian national interest and of liberal democracy. I hope that Morrison is right here. I don't see much yet of an egalitarian of a national interest, and I don't see much yet of further democratization of the United States. There have been a lot of comparisons of the size and scope of Biden's domestic proposals to Franklin Roosevelt's. But Biden and the people around him seem to have realized there's one other parallel, one that helped FDR and can help him. When Roosevelt took office at a time when autocracy was on the rise, Hitler had come to power in Germany just 1 month before FDR was sworn in as president. Democracy stood in disrepute as the governments of Europe and Herbert Hoover's United States had utterly failed to find remedies for the worldwide depression. FDR's case for governmental activism, as he put it in one 1932 campaign speech, his program boiled down to its simplest form was, quote, try something, unquote. Often made note that the survival of democracy itself depended on the adoption of the policies that comprised the New Deal. Well, I guess I have to say, I'm just waiting for Biden to note that the survival of our democracy itself depends on the adoption of the policies that comprise the Green New Deal. Unfortunately, Biden seems deathly afraid of using that particular phrase. Biden has realized that the world now faces at least an echo of that same challenge. And perhaps it's more than an echo, says the author Meyerson. And like Roosevelt, he isn't hesitating to make the case the adoption of his policies will make a strong case for the viability of a now challenged democracy at a time when European and other democracies haven't been particularly good at meeting their citizens' needs. In many ways, though, they've done better than the United States in meeting their citizens' needs. At least until COVID. And for much of COVID, actually, until recently. Of course, now they're really suffering over in Europe. So constituted, Bidenism offers two strong challenges to Republicans. First, opposing his proposals to revitalize industry and rebuild the middle class can lay Republicans open to charges of being China's useful idiots. That's a term Biden would never use, but it comports nicely with reality nonetheless. Second, Bidenism challenges the primacy and legitimacy of the internal civil war and the accompanying demonizations that the Republicans have promoted ever since the Soviet Union collapsed. Throughout the Cold War, Republicans defined themselves by fighting the scourge of Soviet communism, both in itself and because they could argue that Roosevelt, Truman, Kennedy, Johnson reforms are really a slippery slope to socialism, communism, and the Gulag. They still do that to an extent, though it's lost its bite. When the Cold War ended, two Republican leaders, Buchanan on the hustings and Newt Gingrich in Congress, redefined the party's mission by stating the substitute for the commies were the Democrats, whose social liberalism and statism, timid though it was, posed an even greater threat to the nation than communism ever had. Since the mid-1990s, with rising hysteria, Republicans have centered their politics on waging this war. Against this, Biden is arguing we do have an enemy that threatens our democracy. That doesn't mean he's going to lead us into war with China, but it does enable him to redirect other nations' attention to a conflict, or as he prefers to call it, a competition, that's both more real and far less divisive than the one the Republicans are waging against liberal sins, both real and mainly imagined. So he's saying that Biden is arguing that we, the Democrats, are not the enemy. The enemy is really China. So we've all got to do really great things here in America to win the competition with China. Now, seems a little far-fetched to me, but how Morrison goes on, wrapped in the armor of both egalitarian nationalism and liberal democracy, Bidenism bids fair to have wider appeal than any defining democratic ideology since perhaps the New Deal. Oh, I don't know. Getting the actual proposals through the Senate and into the lives of the American people will be a challenge. But through skillful sequencing, the initial plans enter the fray with broad public support. I'm not sure I read this into what Biden is saying. It's an interesting interpretation. People will have to tell whether he is right about the future, or whether an ideology that simply says, we Democrats are not the enemy of the American people. All we're about is public purpose and making things better for the American people according to their own views about what is better for the American people. That's all we're trying to do. I suspect that Biden is going to say a lot of that and maybe emphasize that even more than he emphasizes the competition with China. But who knows? Over the years, the Democrats have loved external enemies, Russiagate and Russiagate and Russiagate. Just incredible. So what about what people really think? Here's a piece from Data for Progress, which I'm not going to go through in detail because if I did it, it would take all the time we had. But I want to call your attention to it, and I want to share it. It's about Biden's first 100 days also. It's a critical analysis and starts with an introduction concerning a New Deal and stating in very general terms, okay, what was accomplished by Franklin Roosevelt, then goes briefly into the comparison. This document is a report from Data for Progress, and it points out this report is divided into 3 sections. Securing a just recovery assesses the Biden administration's approach to charting a course for a post-pandemic economy, including the administration's approach to the coronavirus pandemic, social welfare, and alleviating wealth inequality. Pursuing social justice. That assesses the administration's record on working to dismantle embedded social inequalities, including ending police violence, protecting voting rights, and pursuing justice for migrants. The third area is forging global cooperation. That assesses the administration's progress in rebuilding systems of global cooperation in the aftermath of the Donald Trump administration, including President Biden's approach to the global climate crisis and reassessing Americans' commitments abroad. So this then goes into various sections. Now, the reason why this is very interesting is not only what it says about what he did in these areas, but it follows a pattern of stating what has been done, then talking about what we want, actually based on the polling by Data for Progress. And so in the first area, he goes, they report on support, among Americans for monthly $2,000 coronavirus relief payments that, of course, have been proposed by Bernie Sanders and Rashida Tlaib, and Pramila Jayapal. And lo and behold, top line support for that is 65%. People want that to the extent of 65%. And 78% of Democrats favor that. 60% of independents favor that. And even 54% of the Republicans favor that kind of thing. Also, polling from Data for Progress finds that there's very heavy support for further extensions of the pandemic unemployment insurance program. And not a lot of opposition. There are some people who don't know, but only 30% on the top line, is in opposition. Only 18% of Democrats, only 30%, of independents. %43% of the Republicans, are opposed to this, but 47% support it. So even a plurality of the Republicans support it, according to polling. And that's student debt elimination. Well, Biden's been doing very little there. He's been doing very, very little. He's refused even to actually fulfill his own pre-election promise to relieve $10,000 in student loan debt. He still hasn't done that. And of course, he's refused to support Senator Schumer, okay, and Elizabeth Warren's proposal that he immediately forgive $15,000 in relief for student loan borrowers. So he hasn't done that, but 54% of voters favor that. Among Democrats, 74% favor it. Among independents, 49% favor it. Of course, Republicans oppose it, pretty heavily. But between the Democrats, okay, and independents, he's got to have a margin of roughly 60 to 40% there. In that respect. That's for $50K. His $10K forgiveness is actually less popular. The top line on that is only 52%. That has 75% support from Democrats and only 49%, okay, from independents. So bottom line is 10K is not as popular as the 50K. So Biden really ought to go with the 50K. They have some polling on whether the American Rescue Plan still enjoys bipartisan support. That was the pandemic relief package. Its top line support is 73%. Pretty high. If you look at Democrats alone, there's 92% support for it. Among independents, 66% support. And among Republicans, 56% support. So the American Rescue Plan so far is wildly popular. And when you look at the opposition, it's insignificant. The top line, only 21% are opposed. Only 5% of Democrats are opposed. Only 26% of independents are opposed. 39% of the Republicans, of course, are opposed. But still, more of the Republicans favor it and are opposed to it. And in fact, the majority of Republicans, 56% of them, are in favor of it. So, when you go into the main provisions of the bill, the coronavirus bill, the relief bill, the American Rescue Plan, 83% of small business people supported that plan. The $1,400 checks, 78% of people supported the $1,400 checks. Funding for vaccine distribution and testing, 78%. The moratorium extensions, and utility aid, 78%. Funding to state, local, and territorial governments, 76%. Funding for schools to reopen, 75%. Unemployment benefits, 71%. Expanding tax credits, 68%. Very low levels of opposition to each of these components of that bill. 9% opposition, 16% opposition, 14%, 14%, 17%, 18%, 22%, and 21%. I mean, there's overwhelming support for the Biden plan that has already passed. The child tax credits are extremely popular too. There is a stronger opposition to that. Okay, but among the Democrats, 77% are in support of it, and among independent and third-party people, 59% are in support of it. So that's pretty popular too. As you go through these various things that Biden is putting forward, like for example, expansion of SNAP as a response to COVID-19. Top line support, you're looking at 65%. It's strong. Okay, when you get to health justice, there's support, of course, for masks. Very heavy majority support for giving people free masks, for expanding production, for masks. There is very strong top-line support for using Medicare to make sure every American has health coverage during this crisis. How popular was that? 76% support overall. Only 13% opposed. 76 to 13. That's a margin of 63%. %89 of Democrats supported that. 63%, of independents. I'm sorry, 88% of Democrats supported that. 63% of independents. Okay, so you're getting the picture. People want Biden to do more. He hasn't gotten into healthcare yet, but people want him to do more. They want him to fulfill his promises in that area. They want him to go beyond fulfilling his promises in that area. Well, how about the public option? Well, the public option has 59% support, so it's pretty heavy support. 24% are opposed to that, so it has a substantial margin too. But of course, I have to compare the popularity, of Medicare for the coronavirus to the public option, and you can see Medicare is much more popular. Top line, 76%. Much, much more popular. If you look, at Democrats, 66% in favor of the public option, but 88% were in favor, of by using Medicare to treat everybody during the time of the coronavirus. There's more in this piece, much, much more. And I think you ought to read it all. It really says that those gestures Biden has already made have overwhelming support. The other things he's promised have overwhelming support. And if he goes beyond his promises, and he goes into the kinds of promises being made by the progressives and Bernie Sanders, his support would only be stronger. There is a wealth of polling data here. You should read this particular report. Oh, one last thing about it. Voters overwhelmingly want to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Top line support for that is 66%. Among Democrats, it's 85%. Among independents, it's 61%. It even has a plurality, among the Republicans. It doesn't, it doesn't have a plurality. It's actually 48 to 48. 48% of the Republicans are supporting the $15 an hour, and 48% of the Republicans, are opposed to $15 an hour. So there's much more here, but I advise you to read it. The top line support, for the PRO Act is 59%. It's all very, very favorable to the things that Biden says that he wants to do. So I'll stop sharing this. I'll move on. What about the American Families Plan? Something Biden has yet to pass, but has now proposed. This is a piece by Dave Dayen on April 28th, 2021. And I will share that with you. Dave actually wrote this before the joint session of Congress, where Biden gave his speech, but he had seen the fact sheet, and he wrote this on the basis of the fact sheet. So David actually refers to a piece which was done by the Prospect in October, before Biden became the president, that called for a critical missing piece of the safety net, doing something about that, doing something about the hazardous situations both families and care workers are facing. It says it was not a guarantee at that point that Biden would focus on the care economy. The American Prospect was making the case that it was urgent policy and good politics. And Dave has a link to the to the family care series that was done by the Prospect back in October. And then he says, now let's talk about this American Families Plan. And he says, the short version is that I've never in my political lifetime been more optimistic about the stated priorities of the upper echelons of the government. And I've never been more pessimistic about the prospects of actually getting them into law. So here's what the American Families Plan has to say, and he points to the education. The plan touts 4 more free years of college, getting to that by making a universal pre-kindergarten for ages 3 and 4, and 2 years of free community college. Now, that doesn't seem like 4 more years of free college, 4 more free years of college. To me, sounds like 4 more free years of education. But anyway, both of these are structured as federal-state partnerships with community colleges. The feds provide a 75% share and expects the states to pony up the other 25%. These investments total about $309 billion. I don't know when the feds are ever going to learn the lesson. In the present state of politics, states run by Republican governors will not sign on to programs if they have to pony up any funds themselves. And the states are not the creators of our currency anyway. If you really want to make this a universal right and a universal program, then the feds have to pay for 100%. And the feds can certainly afford to do that because the federal government is the sole creator of federal currency, of high-powered money. There is no excuse for structuring it, in this way. I mean, look at Medicaid. Just look at the Affordable Care Act. One of the biggest failures of the Affordable Care Act was getting states with Republican governors to expand Medicaid. They would not do it. And that was only going to cost them 10%. They still would not do it. There's also $80 billion more for Pell Grants, which would expand the maximum award by $1,400, an increase of 20%. He outlines that. $62 billion for increasing completion and retention rates at community colleges and institutions serving disadvantaged students. $46 billion for the HBCUs and minority serving institutions to expand or create programs. $9 million to train and equip K through 12 teachers. Childcare, the main piece of this is a $225 billion program for child care development grants. These are block grants to states, evidently, to make child care affordable and worth providing. And they say this could be devoted to family providers, child care centers, early Head Start programs. Pay would increase for providers to at least $15 per hour. The current industry average is $12.24. With paid investments in smaller class sizes, training, and better programs. So that's good, but if it's a block grant, those are grants that are usually given to states, and then the states administer it. That's a problem. That used to be something that wasn't a problem. States would happily take the money and do what they were supposed to do. But the Republicans have reinvented what states do at the state level because the states have been taken over by the Koch brothers programs. Anyway, paid leave. Workers would get up to $4,000 a month with a maximum 80% wage replacement rate to leave for pregnancy, medical emergency, care for a loved one, to deal with military deployment of a spouse, or grieve after a death in the family. It ramps up, but it's up to 12 weeks at full strength. It's a $225 billion program. You can be sure the Republicans are going to come for that in the bargaining. The Republicans and the conservative Dems are going to come for that. Then there's nutrition. The summer meal programs would be extended to all eligible children, an expansion of 9.3 million children. School year nutrition programs would also expand by lowering the threshold for eligibility and investing in getting every eligible school in the program. There'll be a $1 billion demonstration project supporting schools with healthy options. Formerly incarcerated individuals would be newly eligible for nutrition assistance. Overall, $45 billion here. Tax credits. The plan permanently extends the ACA exchange subsidies to make insurance coverage affordable. I always hate that word, affordable, but that's what's in the language. But there's $200 billion there. So it might make it more affordable, yes. It extends the increased and advanced child tax credit, but only to 2025. But there are permanent increases to the child and dependent care tax credit and the earned income tax credit for childless workers. Things that are not in the plan, but weirdly are in the fact sheet. The fact sheet says Biden wants to work with Congress to automatically adjust unemployment insurance to make it more generous and lengthier in hard economic times. It says he has a plan to lower prescription drug prices and plow the savings into lowering the Medicare age and improving benefits. But none of that is actually in the proposal. And then there are revenue offsets. And Dave says, that's great, but it won't happen. There are two parallel universes in effect right now. The first rightly praises this and the American jobs plans, needed investments in the core priorities of our country, helping people find a place to live, to move around, to learn and get assistance with their family needs on a sustainable planet. And it praises the bid to make America a more equal place by rewarding work as much as wealth and taxing capital income. These priorities are all crucial and necessary, and it's great to see leadership on them. The parallel universe is the one that recognizes where this is all likely going. There's a guy named Joe Manchin who isn't interested in investing $4 trillion in these programs despite earlier claims to the contrary. As passage depends on his assent, Dave says, I can't see there being any passage. Manchin is in consultation with Republicans who first offer on the American Jobs Plan portion of this package only contained less than $200 billion in new spending. More important, the White House is quietly meeting with GOP officials on a compromise plan with top Biden aide Steve Ricchetti leading the talks. In theory, you could see a two-step process with a thinned-out infrastructure plan passing with bipartisan support, and then something focused on healthcare, childcare, and climate investments, but via budget reconciliation. But if Manchin and friends insist this all has to be paid for, quote unquote, and Republicans reject all tax increases along with plenty of Democrats, I don't see where that leaves us. The Democratic demand to benefit high-income residents of high-tax states by repealing the cap on the state and local tax deduction is also a hurdle. So I know the uber-rich are afraid of losing their gold. But from my vantage point, it's much more likely than not, maybe 6-40, that this all falls down, as nobody can agree on taxes or what investments to salvage. Tax enforcement angle could be a salvation here, but expecting Republicans to fund the IRS is remote. Maybe in the end you get a reconciliation bill at about the tax enforcement number of $700 billion. It's good to make these agenda items priorities so they're on the top shelf of the Democratic agenda for the future. But it doesn't make them law. This fight will take months, so stay tuned. And here, what I want to suggest is that the first thing that Biden should do right now to really get a handle on this is to mint that $100 trillion coin. I said so last night. I'm going to say so again. If he does that right now, and he gets that into the Fed, and he gets it into the Mint's account, he sweeps that account, and he gets the $100 trillion into the Treasury spending account. Okay, and then he says to Manchin, the money for this is already in the account. Okay, it's already paid for. Yes, it's not a deficit neutral budget, but it's debt neutral because we don't have to issue any debt to pay for this particular plan. So, we'll have reasonable rises in taxes, Joe. You said, Joe Manchin, you said that you could get behind 25%. Let's get behind 25% corporate taxes. Okay, let's agree on that. Okay, let's agree where we can agree on some of the other taxes. And then let's get this through under reconciliation. Because any shortfall is already paid for, and this won't increase the federal debt. And if Manchin comes back and says, yes, but according to reconciliation rules, it doesn't say debt neutral. It says deficit neutral. So then, Joe Biden needs to go back to Joe Manchin and say, hey, Joe Manchin, why don't we just do this? Why don't we change the reconciliation rules so it refers to things being debt neutral as opposed to deficit neutral? How about that? I mean, why not that? If something is debt neutral, we can pass it through reconciliation. We'll just make a little change in the language of the rules. We can do that with a 51-50 vote. Why don't we just do that, Joe? And then we can go ahead with this. And you can be a hero with your constituents in West Virginia. In fact, I'll give you this. We'll roll in the $15 an hour minimum wage. And this time around, we just won't take the advice of the parliamentarian. Because you know that this is going to have an impact on the budget. It's sure to have a great impact on the budget. I'm talking about even the $15 an hour minimum wage will have an impact on the budget. Joe Biden needs to get that $100 trillion into the public purse right now. It changes the context of federal spending. That's why it's important. That big $100 trillion sitting there, paying off more and more and more of the federal debt every single month, changes the political context. It completely disempowers the deficit hawks. Because what do the deficit hawks talk about? What they talk about is based on the implicit assumption that we're going to issue debt on a one-to-one basis with deficits. Every time we run a deficit, we're going to issue debt equal to the amount of the deficit. But if we get that $100 trillion coin in there, we can say there's no worries about the debt anymore. There's no reason to worry about that. That should satisfy, it should satisfy even our fine Secretary of the Treasury, who has recently been getting obstreperous about the need to pay for things. Specifically, the need not to increase the federal debt, which may eventually become unsustainable. Once she sees the $100 trillion sitting in the Treasury spending account, she's no longer going to think that the debt is going to be unsustainable, because we won't have to issue any debt at all if we don't want to for the next 15 years. We can pay it nearly all off in that time. That's why doing the $1 trillion coin is so important, because it changes the political context. That's what it's about. It's about changing politics, changing the narrative, changing the argument, losing them their arguments, getting them to have to go back to the drawing board. That's what it's all about. Next. Here's another piece by Dave Dayen. This one is from April 27th. And Dave says, this week is that time in the presidential term where everyone decides to assess a new president's performance using the mile marker of the first 100 days. Some media wags even design an entire newsletter around that somewhat arbitrary figure. That's what Dave did. But well before we hit day 100, a narrative had set in on the center left, saying basically, this is a popular, transformative president, the narrative goes, doing bold yet popular things, proving that good policy is good politics. Certainly the president is popular, or as popular as a president can be in a completely polarized age. His job approval in several polls hovers a couple of points above his share of a two-party vote in 2020. His policy priorities, the infrastructure package, the American Rescue Plan, are even more popular, allowing the administration to redefine bipartisanship as promoting policy preferred by Republican and Democratic voters, if not their representatives in Congress. He should quit talking about bipartisanship and start talking about transpartisanship, so we can get the independents in here. Then he can promote policy preferred by Republican, Independent, and Democratic voters. I mean, remember, there are more independent voters now than either Republican or Democratic voters. Why are they always excluded from the deal with this bipartisan crapola? The vaccine rollout has been a success, even if it's slowing now. And if nothing else was accomplished, that would be a signature achievement. It would be if we could get close to herd immunity, but as you know, and all of the rest of us know, we may already have lost the battle for herd immunity in this idiot country. And yet there's another way to look at this first 100 days of the Biden administration. One where the administration has to be dragged to that place of transformation, pulled forward not just by the progressive movement, but from across the spectrum of the Democratic Party. You can read this as good or bad, depending on your perspective. Maybe it's bad that the Biden administration's instincts are smaller than the moment actually requires, or maybe it's good that the party's instincts are bigger and that the Biden team is listening to them. To be sure, Biden has put forward several laudable policies, leaving Afghanistan without preconditions, rejoining the Paris Agreement, and just today raising the minimum wage for federal contractor employees to $15 an hour. He has delivered on a number of campaign promises and on one big meta policy, meeting the required level of ambition and rejecting naysayers who tried to use deficits and inflation to trim his sails. He potentially provided a lasting blueprint for Democrats. But let's look at several other issues that have transpired over the past few days. In response to the tragic output of COVID-19 in India, Biden's team ignored calls for help for several days. Finally, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan ended the export ban on raw materials for vaccines. Then, after weeks of prodding, Biden decided to share with India and the world dormant AstraZeneca vaccines that had been sitting in a warehouse in about Baltimore. But when this column had been written, it was not yet the case. And to be fair, it didn't happen within the 100 days. But finally, as you know, Biden has come around to supporting the idea that the IP for the vaccines be transferred to manufacturers, in other countries, so that the global demand can finally be met, and maybe we can finally get rid of this pandemic instead of having it hang on for years and years and years and years, have it come back every year, have to continue to take vaccine shots. You get it. He finally did that. He fought it for a while, but the pressure came and came and came, and he finally did that. The administration set a deadline of March 15th for an emergency temporary workplace standard for COVID-19, then shot past that date and at one point even put the rule on hold. After pushing from Senate Democrats and labor unions, finally yesterday, the Department of Labor advanced the temporary standard through the regulatory process, which means it's still not active until after OMB signs off on it. After initially leaving out changes to health care and the American Families Plan, which will be announced in Wednesday's speech to a joint session of Congress, the administration took a ton of heat from all factions of the party, and it finally decided to include $200 billion to extend increased subsidies for the Affordable Care Act insurance exchanges. This has not stopped the lobbying, as over 80 House Democrats spanning the ideological divide from AOC to Conor Lamb are pushing to lower the Medicare eligibility age and allow prescription drug prices to be negotiated in Medicare. The latter, a cost-reducing policy that Biden's team has still left out. The Biden's team's greatest accomplishment, the expanded and advanced child tax credit and the American Rescue Plan, only lasts for 1 year. Democrats pressured Biden to make it permanent, but he rejected that, citing the high cost, and instead will reportedly only extend it to 2025 in tomorrow's announcement. However, Richie Neal, Democrat of Massachusetts, chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, and I add, donor prostitute extraordinaire, has deviated from that script, today introducing a family care bill that makes the child tax credit permanent. Richie Neal steps up to the plate and hits a single. The Biden team needed only to sign a piece of paper to increase the refugee cap and allow tens of thousands of migrants. He promised to do it. He briefed Congress. He changed his mind. And reportedly it was his decision to change his mind. He left the refugees stuck on the tarmac. But he got tremendous pushback from all corners of the party. And he relented, but only to say that he would set a new refugee cap by May 15th. And he has. He has. He's beaten May 15th by quite a number of days now, and he's now announced the cap of 62,500. So he did keep his promise and extend that cap. After much soul searching and backfiling and getting pressure, he did respond to the pressure. One thing this is all showing is that the guy can respond to internal party pressure. That's important because Trump didn't respond to anything. Obama would never respond to anything. He would always say, F you, unless something was coming from the center. This is a defined trend that I'm willing to spell it out, even if it doesn't get me onto calls with Ron Klain. On a number of key areas, Biden's team has not been the one with the boundless ambition. They've reneged or stayed silent on a number of items, only removing when enough pressure has been created by the political system to make inaction impossible. And often those reluctant moves are half steps, raw materials, and AstraZeneca vaccines, but no IP waiver on vaccine patents or ACA exchange subsidies, but no drug price reform or so on. Even on a minimum wage increase for federal contractors, there's much more that can be done, as we've outlined in our executive action tracker. Biden can ban contractors from forced employee arbitration agreements. He can require them to maintain neutrality in union organizing. He can mandate replacement contractors to rehire the previous firms' workers. None of this has been done. As we're moving into an uncertain area on legislative policy, this is problematic. Joe Manchin wants the infrastructure package whittled down to next to nothing with the participation of the Republicans, as his vote is critical. There's simply no guarantee that anything monumental will come of the infrastructure bill. The return of earmarks might spur cooperation or it might not. Manchin also refuses to budge on the filibuster and thinks voting right changes have to be done in common cause with a party that's actively moving to suppress the vote across the country. And by the way, that's going to rely on this voter suppression to stop the Democrats from retaining control of Congress in 2022. I mean, it is ridiculous for Manchin to take such a position. He himself might lose his chairmanship. There are some bipartisan gangs circling one another on China policy and criminal justice. But again, success is not ensured. And by the way, this is another reason why that $100 trillion coin has to be done, and has to be done by right now. Because with $100 trillion in the Treasury spending account, you have a situation where Manchin will look like an idiot if he doesn't pass these bills. He won't be able to say the money is not there. He won't be able to say the debt is going to increase and might be unsustainable. He won't be able to give a decent reason for advocating the austerity. He won't be able to say we can't afford it because the money will be stuck in the account. Neither will Kyrsten Sinema. Neither will any of the other Austerians be able to oppose the legislation that, based on the Data for Progress polling, is so popular when they don't even have a fig leaf to use to oppose it. Take away their fig leaf. Yes, many of us in Washington now accept the MMT ideas that really the debt is nothing to worry about. And it would be great if everybody believed that. But the general public still gets scared by the overall size of the debt. It has to be demonstrated to them that we have the money to pay off all the debt, and further, that as it falls due, we will pay it off, and further, we won't be issuing any more except for special purposes. That has to be demonstrated to the general public that will not read Stephanie Kelton's book, and that will not read the newspapers in which the book is featured, and that will not listen to explanations by economists concerning why there is no danger of the debt getting unsustainable. As long as those people are out there, then Manchin and Sinema and Coons and Carper and Angus King, they will all have their fig leaf. For God's sake, Biden, take away their fig leaf. Take away their damn fig leaf. Dave says, I mentioned the Executive Action Tracker and its 77 discrete agenda items. Biden's accomplished 7 and gets partial credit for another 5. That's not good enough, leaving on the table a host of policies on climate, healthcare, financial regulation, conservation, consumer protection, and much more. Implementation of grants for arts venues was delayed 4 months and only restarted yesterday. Implementation of rental assistance for desperate tenants is just as bad. Immigration policy is thus far a trail of broken promises. The first 100 days have been successful, but by definition they're incomplete, and the legislative window is rapidly closing thanks to recalcitrant senators in a narrow majority, and that which Biden has control over. His executive authority has established a defined trend of doing too little and being pushed to do more. And that's really one of the central points. If he does all these things he can do by executive order, including relieving student debt. And by the way, he doesn't have to stop at 50,000. He has the authority to eliminate it all. Just eliminate it all. Get it done. Get it done right now. If he does all these various things that have been outlined by the prospect that he can do in excruciating detail, within 2 months from now, he will be so popular, that if he does that and he puts in the $100 trillion coin too, Sinema and Manchin and the others are not going to stand against a president demanding passage of his infrastructure bill and his American Families Plan bill under those conditions. It's all about the political context. Biden's approval ratings will rise to 80%. They're at 60 now. If he does all these things, they will rise to 80%. And Manchin won't dare stand in his way in relation to these 2 bills, because Biden will then be in a position to say, if you oppose this, Joe, I'm coming to West Virginia in 2024, and Norma Jean Swearingen is going to be the next senator from West Virginia in 2024 if you oppose me on this, Joe Manchin. I'm telling you, don't you dare do it, or you're going to pay. He can put it as politely as he wants. By the way, there is a link to a piece I won't have time to go over. It's by Jonathan Ticini, and the title of it is Joe Manchin's vanity and ego will destroy the Democratic Party, while Bernie Sanders' maturity is building the party. This is a very good piece by Jonathan Ticini, also taking out after Joe Manchin. I highly recommend, that you read it. Okay, I won't have time to go through it. It's got lots of good statistics in it. Lots of good numbers that can be used against Joe Manchin in 2024, and in advertisements run in West Virginia right now to bring Joe Manchin around. We haven't used the strategy enough of pushing Manchin and Sinema right now in their states. If we follow that part of the strategy too, not just doing the executive orders, but getting the Democratic National Committee on board with going after Joe Manchin right now with ads in his state, and Kyrsten Sinema too. If the DNC starts running ads in their state trying to bring these people around, they're going to come around if the DNC starts running those ads. And the DNC right now can be controlled by Joe Biden. It's time he grabbed that control and say, this is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to do. I'll take care of Carper and Coons myself. They're my friends. But you don't have to run any ads against them. I'll bring them around. But you start with Manchin and Sinema. Then if we get any more trouble from Maggie Hassan and Jeanne Shaheen, it'll be their turn. And by then, Angus King and John Tester are going to get the idea that they vote along with administration or else. So, next piece. Glad you guys are still here. It looks like your numbers have been increasing. That's good, because there's more to come. There's Tax and Spend by Robert Kuttner, April 23rd, 2021. What Robert had to say. The originally epithet made famous by Ronald Reagan was an aphorism which was attributed to FDR's aide, Harry Hopkins. Quote, tax and tax, spend and spend, elect and elect, unquote. And it worked, as long as regular people were getting the benefit of those revenues and rich people were paying the taxes. For half a century, Democrats forgot this formula and were thoroughly intimidated by Reaganism to the point of joining Republicans in cutting taxes on rich people, which the Democrats have still been doing, and starving government's capacity to benefit everyone. By some miraculous alchemy, Joe Biden is channeling Harry Hopkins, and the result is popular. And of course, he refers to the infrastructure bill, or I should say, the American Family Plan, which will hike the capital gains rate on the very rich, raise the top rate on the personal income tax, double down on tax enforcement of wealthy tax cheats, and add a minimum corporate tax rate that overrides the loopholes. All of this will help pay for benefits that are also popular, like the universal pre-kindergarten, child care, free community college, and better care of the elderly, and better pay for caregivers. Yes, but while putting forward those taxes and fighting for the taxes, because the rich have to pay their fair share, with that $100 trillion sitting in the Treasury spending account, if those few Democratic holdovers still insist, after all the pressure on them, they still insist that they don't want to raise taxes as much as Biden wants to raise taxes, then the $100 trillion sitting there can simply take care of it. So Kuttner talks more about tax and spend and the virtues, of tax and spend. He ends by saying tax and spend has political and fiscal momentum. This is the moment to maximize it. And I'd say, yes, he should do that. He should try to do that. But if in the end he needs to compromise on the taxing somewhat in order to get a couple of votes to put this over, he needs to bargain with some people in order to put this over. He's got to get through these next two bills under reconciliation. No ifs, ands, or buts. But if he mints that $100 trillion coin, he'll be able to say with a clear conscience, this is debt, but neutral. He can get them to change those rules. So reconciliation is okay if you can show it's going to be debt neutral as opposed to deficit neutral. That's all he's got to do, in order to get it passed. There'll be time for tax and spend as we go further down the road. And that brings us to our final piece of the night, which I don't think we're going to have to spend a great deal of time on. Title of that particular piece, which is also by Dave Dayen. It was the last piece in his First 100 series. And the title of it is The Deficit Obsession is Back. Dave says, as we close First 100, that old deficit hawkery threatens the promise of the Biden administration. And the caption under that photo, President Biden hands Nancy Pelosi a copy of his address, which fully pays for itself within the 10-year budget window. Okay. Having established that government can work, he, Biden, is pushing for more of it and associating the project with the ability for democracy to function, setting up a race between democracy and autocracy for control of the globe. It sounds pretty stark, but FDR used this rhetorical technique in his day to good effect at a time during the Depression when people wondered if democracy was worth salvaging and openly pining for an American dictator. Harold brilliantly deconstructs all of that. Go read it. That's the Harold Morrison piece that I covered earlier today. This is a comparison to Roosevelt that feels right, not strained or Pollyannish. I felt it was a little strange. It is a recognition that neoliberalism as a counter to Reaganism failed and that we must remake the country to save the country. That much is true. But some old habits die hard, and the biggest whiplash of the first 100 days came when Biden turned away from all the investment he wants to make and toward how we must pay for them all. You'll recall there was a lot of celebration over how Biden slayed the deficit dragon, how he not only didn't bother to pay for anything in the American Rescue Plan, his team actively rejected the usual nonsense arguments about runaway inflation and, quote, targeted, unquote, relief. Well, look, I think we can now say this only applies to emergency legislation in a pandemic. Quote, so how do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do that without increasing the deficits, unquote, Biden said last night. What I propose is fair fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay for the plans I have proposed. This was in a section where Biden attacked trickle-down economics, but even there he condemned Trump for adding, quote, $2 trillion to the deficit with his tax cuts. This is not limited to Biden himself. Here's White House advisor Karine Jean-Pierre saying we have to pay for the plan and not put the burden on the American people. Council on Economic Advisors member Jared Bernstein has consistently made appearances touting how the deficit will not increase. There's just no question this is a preoccupation of the White House. How about Janet Yellen in the last few days saying how wonderful Biden's plan is because it's going to pay for everything? No deficit, deficit neutral. There's just no, if you go back to the campaign, this was the plan. Emergency funding to rescue the country and back to the days of pay-go politics. That's what we were afraid of, back to the days of pay-go politics, and here it is. I think the problem here is obvious. There's no consensus on the pay-fors. Republicans don't want any of them, so forget a compromise measure. It's welcome that Democrats have quickly recognized that, but there's no consensus among Democrats on these tax measures either. This nightmare piece from the Wall Street Journal sets the scene. We already knew the corporate tax increase was being whittled away. Now Democrats are skittish about equalizing capital gains and income taxes for the top 0.3% of the population. Thing about Congress is that everyone's a self-styled tax expert. They have their own ideas on how to raise revenue and their own ideas about what should be left untouched. Every tax plan sounds good until the one person it affects complains. Yeah, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that guy over there under the tree. And you end up with Hamlet-like indecision displayed by Senator Jon Tester, Democrat of Montana. Quote, I don't want to raise any taxes, but I don't want to put stuff on the debt either. But if we're going to build infrastructure, we have to pay for it somehow, unquote. Yikes. That is an objection, a specific objection, that would be addressed by the $100 trillion coin. With $100 trillion in the bank, we wouldn't be putting any stuff on the debt. We wouldn't be. Test it, and we could say to them, hey, John, we don't have to put anything on the debt, and we don't have to raise taxes. At least not by that much. Let's just raise some so we can say the wealthy are paying their fair share. How about that? But we can compromise on the taxes. So your wealthy donor, you can turn to your wealthy donors and you can say, see, I got you something on the taxes. But you won't have to worry about the stuff either. So Jon Tester no longer has to be Hamlet, right? There's one potential out here. The Biden proposal to have the IRS simply collect what it's owed, investing $80 billion towards that end. This appeals to a lot of members because it doesn't change the tax code. Without raising taxes a dime, as California Rep. Barrow kind of puts it. That's so foolish. Of course, it raises taxes by a dime, by billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. It just doesn't change the tax rates. Just makes people pay what they owe. They're going to view it as a tax increase. I mean, who do they think they're fooling? Yet could yield trillions in revenue. You don't think people are going to view that as a tax increase? The IRS commissioner said in open testimony that the gap between money owed and money collected is $1 trillion a year. So Janet Yellen wants to collect that $1 trillion a year. She's going to be sitting on top of the IRS commissioner talking about where's my $1 trillion a year. That's what she's going to be doing. Where's the $1 trillion? The problem is that if you're doing this precise pay-for accounting, you have to rely on the Congressional Budget Office. They looked at this last July and found that increasing IRS funding for collections by $40 billion, half the Biden plan, only gets you $103 billion in revenue over 10 years. That's ridiculously low. They're saying that $40 billion in funding only closes 1% of the IRS tax gap. They're lying. They're lying. But they're the scorekeepers, and unless they change their mind, Tax enforcement just won't get you far. I got a solution for that, Joe. Get rid of the scorekeepers. Make them advisory. Get rid of pay-go and just make them advisory. Then they can keep the score any damn way they want. And by the way, while you're at it, fire the head of CBO, get him fired by Congress, and put in Stephanie Kelton as the head of CBO. That's what you need to do. If you can't get consensus on the pay-fors, and if your vestigial rhetoric of fiscal responsibility demands that everything be offset, the only result is the narrowing of the tax plan necessarily reduces the spending. No. If it demands that everything be offset, you can offset it with that $100 trillion coin. That's an offset too. It doesn't take any money out of the economy. Right, doesn't take any money out of the economy. But it's still an offset, because what it means is that no debt needs to be issued. Of course, none needed to be issued anyway. But then you have the perfect excuse not to issue any debt, that you have the money in the bank already to pay for it. So what's fiscally irresponsible? What's fiscally irresponsible about paying for things the country needs when you already have the money in the bank? There's no question of fiscal sustainability then. What is fiscal responsibility according to the Austerians? What is fiscal responsibility, according to Joe Biden? Fiscal responsibility is spending in such a way that you don't give the United States any fiscal sustainability problems. And from their point of view, fiscal unsustainability is defined by increasing the debt by huge amounts. But if you use the platinum coin, you don't have to increase the debt at all. So your spending can be perfectly fiscally responsible from the standpoint of fiscal sustainability. So it is not true that the only result is narrowing of the tax plan, necessarily reducing the spending. That's a ridiculous box for Democrats to put themselves into. Yes, it is, Dave Dayen. But they don't have to put themselves into that box. All they have to do is mint the $1 trillion coin to get out of it. The $100 trillion coin, sorry, I take it back. $1 trillion won't do it. But $100 trillion will. The fact sheet on the American Families Plan cited a paper showing that every dollar invested in early childhood education yields $7.30 in benefits. And Dave says, so why are you paying for it then? Why are you paying for it? It pays for itself. Not that there aren't unanswered questions about the structure of the spending. Why you need 3 child care benefit programs is baffling, as is why families must pay a share of child care expenses, but not pre-K, or how to put states with wildly different community college tuition into the same free program they must help to fund. We've been digging into a lot of those design questions in our Building Back America series, but I'm far more concerned that we're putting deficit concerns over needed investments to save the planet, give dignity to care work, get the country moving, and more. Solving problems is far more important than the long-run deficit picture in 2045. The entire logic of the Biden project collapses if you yoke it to deficit concerns. Now, I have to say something else about this. Everybody here in this discussion is conflating the deficit and the debt. They are not the same things. The bottom line is that they correspond closely because we choose to make them correspond closely, but they are conceptually different things. And the kicker for deficit spending, the thing that undermines deficit spending in the minds of the Austerians, the thing that makes deficit spending an evil in their minds, is that it increases the debt. If you decouple these two and get that $100 trillion coin in there, get that $100 trillion into the public purse, then those things are decoupled. You can deficit spend for years and years, okay, and years. And you can pay off the debt during all those years. The deficits and the debt will go in different directions. And you can point out to people, and you can make the case that what deficits really are contributions to the private sector, contributions to the non-government sector. That is what they are. They are surpluses for the non-government sector, or at least contributions to surpluses. That every year the Treasury Department runs a deficit is a year the Treasury Department is running a surplus for the non-government sector. You can make that case. It'll be apparent to people because more net financial assets will be in the economy. And deficits will be higher. The correlation of greater deficits and greater surpluses in the private sector will be 1-to-1 for people to see. And the negative correlation to debt payoff will also be 1-to-1 during this period until the debt is finally paid off. Everybody will be able to see that. And the whole rationale of austerity mongering will be gone at last. But popular books won't do it. Textbooks won't do it. Only action will do it. And for right now, the action, the possible action, is in Biden's hands. He can order Janet Yellen to order the mint to mint that $100 trillion coin and deposit it at the Fed. And he can talk to Jay Powell about changing the political context, getting the Fed to credit the $100 trillion coin. Actually, the Fed doesn't have any choice when it comes to doing that, at least if Jay Powell wants to stay on as the chair of the Fed. Because as a legal matter, it is possible for Biden to get Jay Powell dismissed if he goes against the judgment of the Secretary of the Treasury, okay, and the administration on this. I won't have to go into this to explain it to you, but the law is the law. That's in the law. Okay. Amazingly, the old Obama team is more forward-thinking on this. Jason Furman notes that these are investments and we have fiscal space. Peter Orszag wrote 2 months ago that Biden must put climate concerns over the deficit. Larry Summers wrote in 2014 that infrastructure spending pays for itself. Biden's team has gotten totally away from Obama-era thinking, but the Obama team has evolved on this point, and progressives need to evolve too. There's not enough appreciation of how this deficit thing could really and truly blow up this entire package. It's time to loudly state that the government was put in to solve problems. Inequality is a problem, and I strongly support attacking capital income to counteract that. But the deficit blind canyon is a bad place to be. That needs to be made perfectly clear. I couldn't agree more with David Dayen on that. So, that covers that. There is a final paragraph on this being the final installment in the series. I don't really have time to go over that. I have to turn to your comments now. But I think you're getting my point on this one about what the future holds and what has to be done by the Biden administration. Before I go to your comments, okay, I want to point out that on Saturday, what I'll be discussing then is the knife edge that we are on in this country with respect to politics, and what's going on at the knife edge, and what's happening on the knife's edge, and why it's so important that we come down on the right side of the knife edge. So, I now turn to your comments. I hope you all like this one. I certainly did. And there's Devora Acts, my daughter, Devora. Hi, Pop. Carmen Muniz says, Bonnie Licious is in the house. And Carmen says, damn, Facebook stops the stream every few seconds. Kay says, shared. Thank you, Kay. Lana says, hi, Devora. And Carmen says, Biden ain't all that. He's just out. At least he ate a hardliner fascist. And we had to settle. But for now, Carmen says, we had to settle every, I'm not sure what Carmen was saying there. Terry Cook says, the pandemic has us in fear and panic. That is perfect for as long as things are peachy keen. Nothing progresses for the common man. Fear is number one, bringing down our vibrations and energy. Love, passion, hope bring up our positive energy. The Top Cat Plan. Kay says, watched an hour-long live stream from Jayapal on getting rid of the filibuster. Very good. Was her 1 hour long pitch on getting rid of the filibuster as good as my various pitches on getting rid of the filibuster? I'd be surprised if it was. Anyway. And Kay says, I watch Hanauer's live stream every Friday. Yeah, Hanauer's pretty good. And Terry says, we need all lead pipes replaced with hemp plastic. PirateRadioUSA.net. BoldBraveMedia.com. Okay, and Abbas Morhino says we can help you get to your IELTS, NCLX, PT, OET, PMP, GRE certificate with or without sitting for the exams, get writing materials. Oh, that's an ad. Go somewhere else with your ad. And Carmen says, this dude has a bromance crush on Biden. Which dude is that? Oh, you're probably talking about Harold Meyerson. I don't think he had exactly a crush on Biden. Steve Gonzo says, Trump's new media outlet platform is an etch-a-sketch. And Terry Cook says, Nick Hanauer's pitchfork economics is quite aware of the fact the lower ratio of highest pay to the lowest makes for a long run. and provide production of hemp products and services of all green equipment is our new direction. Carmen Muna says, and his new limo is a short yellow bus. And Terry Cook says, Richard Romine's 19 points is nothing short of a masterwork, posted on March 18th, 2021 by Terry, House of Public Discourse, radio.com. 19 points of the Foundation's Codex, the Code of Agreement, House of Public Discourse, the Devil's Advocates Radio. The best batteries made of hemp are coming to all store sizes and ready to compete with Tesla Motors. Terry Cook says 50,000 uses for the most important plant on Earth. No wonder it was outlawed in 1937. That, folks, was the number one most dastardly act ever inflicted upon humanity. Westinghouse proclaimed, we bring you life, better life through chemistry. What he didn't say, in 100 years, all our life's essentials will be trashed. Even when it says not the only important one, we need to grow food for everyone. Joe, what do you think, Carmen says, Joe, what do you think will be Biden's ace in the whole legislation that he'll come forward with to possibly win the midterms for Dems? If he doesn't get the 50 Dems in the Senate together on something, he won't get any ace in the hole legislation passed. If he wants to get the 50 Dems together, it's absolutely essential for him to mint the $100 trillion coin and take away the fig leaf. Kerry says, finally breaking through to the other side, building bridges of our coalition to make things right for the common man. We are the ones buying products. Pay us well is key. Asnik Hanauer, the first billionaire to be on Top Cat plan. Picture taken by Larry Alger. GoJNN.com. And Kay says, yes, Evelina Pond Community Gardens everywhere. Terry says, we have the greatest injustice going on. Not growing hemp in massive amounts is evil to prevent good from rising up. Terry says, homemade green hydrogen and cannabis are the two rocks in our Hempcrete Foundation. Carmen says, hell, I'm still looking for my $600. Kay says, hemp is so good for so many things. Carmen says, landlords and property owners got the judge to side with them against the People's Rent Forgiveness Moratorium. Yes, but we still don't know how broad that particular finding is. It was a low-level court. We don't know how much, it actually applies to. It will be appealed. It is being appealed by the administration. Evelina says, I take it the bill is a popular one. Which bill are we talking about? Steve Gonzo says, a group of Democratic senators, including Senators Martin Heinrich, Blumenthal, and Joe Manchin, have introduced a bill that would block Louis DeJoy's 10-year plan for the U.S. Great! Maybe that will pass. I certainly hope that passes. That 10-year plan has to be blocked and DeJoy has to go. Carmen says more people are dying than are being born. Future healthy wage slave workers in jeopardy for neoliberal oppressors, but they're just gestures. L. Stephen Day smiles. Evelina Pond says, can anyone be opposed to someone else's $15 an hour minimum wage? I take it, but those opposed to making more than that, sure. And L. Stephen Day says, I missed the 100-day Joe talk, but laugh out loud. Deborah Wilson says, you hold way too much stock in the belief this man is anything approaching a functioning brain in regard to the public good. He never has. He always hated the little people. L. Stephen Day says, mint the coin. Kay says, does Biden even know about the coin? Yeah, he does. Kay says, agree on that term, Joe. Idiot country is right. Carmen says, peppermint or spearmint? Peppermint or spearmint? Oh, it's a platinum coin. L. Stephen Day says, protecting intellectual property when it is integrated into public matters like vaccinations and voting, sucks. Absolutely. Corporations need refugees as expendable and exploitable workers. They're not being humanitarian. Kay says Biden is no FDR for sure. Kay says, when can they get rid of Manchin? Not till 2024. And Carmen says CRFC, right? CRFC? Not sure what you mean by CRFC. And Kay says maybe Bernie needs to go to West Virginia like he did to Kentucky the other day. Oh, you mean in campaign for Paula Jean? I don't know if Paula Jean has announced her candidacy yet. And this is not for 2022. This is for 2024. He went to Kentucky the other day to support but Charles Booker's candidacy. And he did do that. But Charles Booker is running in 2022 against Rand Paul. Terry Cook says both were and are the Freemasons. Ricky Rand says so much theater from Democrats. And Carmen says Biden would be so popular, the fascists wouldn't be able to make a comeback. Hulk must smash. Carmen said, I'm surprised that Sinema isn't in Arizona recounting votes for Cheeto Tweedo. Shane Coughlin said, hey, Joe, what's up? Hashtag US Solution Summit. Thanks for the help with that. I love everything you're saying here. Thank you, Shane. Thanks for visiting. Carmen Muniz says, hashtag sarcasm. Kay says, we need to make the rich pay their fair share. Steve Gonzo says, GOP pretends climate change can't possibly affect immigration from Central America. Yeah, GOP's lying all the time. Steve Gonzo says Ohio becomes the latest state to introduce a major voter suppression bill. They haven't passed it yet, though, have they? Carmen Muniz says fascists laying out their playbook. Carmen says fascists, plural correction. Kay says Steve Gonzo was a good live stream today by the ACLU Ohio saying they will try to fight this. Yep. Steve Gonzo says 36 million people would be completely debt-free if we cancel 50,000 of student debt. How many people would be completely debt-free if we canceled all of student debt, Steve? Kay says, I wish I would have went to college when it was cheap. My life would be totally different today. Patrick's Time says Biden, is illegitimate. I think the legitimacy of Biden varies. It varies. Right now, it's on the upswing. Carmen says the trillion coin with 14 zeros. Yes, the 100 trillion coin with 14 zeros, right. And Biden may become much more legitimate if he acts in the right way. We are urging that. We are pressuring him to do that. But it isn't clear at all that he's going to do that. He's still Biden. He still has his old record. He still has his old instincts. As we can just see from the deficit fiscal responsibility shtick, getting back to that shtick, he knows it's stupid. He knows it's stupid. He's just playing it for political reasons. So Kay says, back then I only had one teacher who suggested that to me. He said I should go for journalism. KRTD Media says, hashtag Joe Firestone for president. I take it that is in the left. But whoever you are under that label, thank you very much. Carmen Yunus says, someone share this to ALC's Facebook page, okay, and to other progressives. I will also, and Kay says, good report, Joe. And Kara TD Media says, but Joe Biden is a Republican. Well, it's a little complex. Kara TD said, I'm going to be watching from now on. Very insightful stuff. KRTD Media says, but did you see the Ryan Knight versus Ron Grimm discussion on the Vanguard? Yes, I did see it. I thought it was a very civil discussion. Okay, but both are on. I caught it the first thing this morning. But last night I wasn't able to watch it, okay, because I had my own live stream. I generally actually like the discussion, but okay, I didn't think that that Ryan Grimm made it clear why the force to vote, the specific force to vote that they had, that is, force to vote for the purposes of getting a floor vote for Medicare for All, was the wrong strategy at that time, the wrong tactic to use. Okay, and you know this, Indy Left, if I am talking, okay, to Indy Left. You know that what should have been done was for the squad to block Nancy Pelosi until she withdrew, and then to negotiate with candidates to replace her, to get a whole raft of things, including a floor vote for Medicare for All at a minimum. But there were many things that they could have got, including much more power in this session of Congress, if they only had gotten rid, okay, of Nancy Pelosi, of Nancy Pegosi, as some of us would like to say here. And KRTD Media says, the fight for 25, it should not be the fight for 15. Absolutely. It should not be the fight for 15. The fight for 15 was fine for 2015, but it's now 2021. And housing is far, far more expensive. And now we have to make it the fight, okay, for 25. There's another reason why we have to make it the fight for 25. And that reason is we have to communicate, okay, to them that the longer they delay the $15 an hour minimum wage, the higher the price will be that they will have to pay. That we're not stopping at 15. That because they delayed 15 for so long, it's now 25. And if they delay it for another 25, for another 5 years, it's going to be 35. But eventually, we're going to get it. And we're going to take it right out of their hides. Carmen says, oops, I meant OCFR earlier. Damn, I forgot. You mean overt congressional financing? Yeah, no. They can't go for overt congressional financing now. The reason why they cannot do that is because they don't have sufficient control of Congress to do that and to get that into appropriations bills. Biden has the authority that's necessary to get the $100 trillion platinum coin minted. That can take care of things for 4 or 5 years. Then we can get to overt congressional financing. By then, everybody will see overt congressional financing is perfectly viable. And then it can be put in as boilerplate material for every appropriations bill. And Melissa says, buffering. And Melissa Green says, I love the conversation. When do you go live? I generally go live Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on the channel you're watching now. Balana says, this is live, Melissa. When do you go live, Joe? Tell me. She says, I have to know when you go live. And she said, in order to catch you live, I need to go live. Lana says, I think we have a troll. Okay. And Melissa replies and says, I'm not a troll. I am Melissa. Okay. And Melissa says, that's super rude. No, I'm Shane. Okay. And Melissa says, the troll has been reported. And Melissa says, I'm not a troll. I'm Melissa. And Melissa says that Lana is a troll. And KRTD Media says, I'm Shane Coughlin, the executive director at KRTD Media. Indy Left is also with KRTD, but I'm not sure if he's on this stream. Okay, I thought it probably wasn't you, Shane, because you signed in as yourself earlier. So I assume that you were signing in as yourself. Okay, then it was Indy who was signing in as KRTD Media. Lana says the troll has now been blocked. And Kay says housing is out of hand. Carmen says, yes, that's it, Joe. And KRTD says, I'm on Facebook and YouTube. I switched. Okay, thank you, Shane. It's good to know that. So thank you, and thank you for coming. I hope that everyone enjoyed this stream. I certainly enjoyed it myself. Okay, I think we've come to the end now. Thank you for all your help. Thank you for staying. And I'll see you on Saturday. And I hope to have a real corker then, as they say. So for now, good night. Have a wonderful day tomorrow. Solana says good night. Okay, Dolores says thank you and good night all. Steve Gonzo says Donald Trump may be breaking the rules on his own social media site, despite the fact that he is the only one who can post on the site. It still has terms of use like real social media platforms. Were his blog to enforce its own rules, Mr. Trump would have his account suspended. You already broke the rules. KRTD Media asks, Joe, when do you announce your presidential campaign? I'm sorry, Shane. I'm never going to announce my presidential campaign. The reason why I'm not going to announce it, okay, is because I am now 82 years old. I'm still on the right side, okay, of 82, as it were. Not on the wrong side of 82 yet. Okay? But I'm on the right side, okay, of 82. And I doubt that as an 82-year-old that I would have a lot of chance of withstanding the rigors of a campaign. Karen says, deep effing stuff, Joe. Wonderful Firestone. Oh, thank you, Carmen. And KRTD Media says, good night. Thank you, Shane. Thanks for coming. But good night, all. I'll see you Saturday.